Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome again to the portals of Inspirare India, where we have scheduled a comics night for you today. It's a wonderful cast of characters who are going to speak to us today. First and foremost, we will have Mr. Sarbajit Sen, renowned cartoonist, graphic artist, and filmmaker, talking to us about his journey with Tintin. And after that, we expect to have on the show Pippa King, the first London editor of Marvel Comics, talking about her reminiscences and experience with Marvel, the March of Marvel. We all know that graphic narratives have a very long and checkered history, right from medieval woodcuts in the West to such things as the notebooks of Leonardo. Theories are abundant about where the actual origins of graphic writing began. Because graphic writing brings together two of the most wonderful achievements of man. Man's art of etching, drawing, and of course, language, so the visual language. The visuality of language and line coming together is in a wonderful amalgam, is more or less, let us face it, a Western phenomenon. Although there has been a lot of very interesting and important work in places like India, it has always remained a Western thing. Uh, Although, let me put it this way, that with new generations of youth in India, it is once again perhaps going in directions, very interesting and very radical directions, this art of graphic writing, of graphic portraiture, where we might say that the narrative arts of storytelling find space and extension in wonderful ways. Uh, Without further ado, I would like to introduce my co-moderator for this event this evening, Dr. Pradipta Mukherjee, who will herself say a few words about Tintin, that boyhood wonder, that most pleasant of childhood memories that we have grown up with. For example, I myself can attest to reading both the English and the Bengali version of Tintin in my formative years. She's going to talk a little bit about Tintin, Tintin in Tibet, which has strangely, rather, has found its way into the curriculum, and probably a much needed addition to the curriculum because it opens up new vistas for students and young adults. And after that, she would formally introduce our distinguished speaker, first speaker for this evening, Mr. Sarbajit Sen. So over to you now, Pradipta.
Thank you, Devashish. On behalf of Inspirare India, I extend a very warm welcome to our first speaker of the evening, Sarbajit Sen. A hearty welcome to you, Sarbajit Da.
Thank you.
Sarbajit Sen is a very well-known graphic artist, cartoonist, and a national award-winning filmmaker. He has been a regular contributor of comic strips, cartoons to leading national and international dailies. He won a national award for the best comics on environment in 1994. Painting in Time, his debut film on the tradition of Thangka painting in Sikkim, won a national award as the best film on art and culture category in 1995. The Adventures of Timpa, his first comic book, was exhibited in Switzerland and has been relaunched. Sarbajit Da also teaches at the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad, and Satyajit Ray Film and Television Institute, Kolkata, as a guest faculty. A hearty welcome to you, Sarbajit Da. Devashish, this is a fascinating evening because we will be discussing Tintin, the Tintin series, and Sarbajit Da will be talking a lot, I'm sure, about his own works as a graphic designer, as a cartoonist. So we are much looking forward to that. But before I hand over the session officially to Sarbajit Da, I would just like to say a few words on Tintin in Tibet to set the webinar in motion because many students of Calcutta University and other universities are also attending the event. So Sarbajit Da can treat Tintin in Tibet as a takeoff point and then he can move on to his own works as a graphic artist and cartoonist. Uh, When we think of Tintin in Tibet, the predominant overarching themes are, of course, friendship, loyalty, perseverance. It's about love, companionship, affection, duty, human virtues. But then there is a quest for spirituality, because what starts as a kind of a dream, gradually becomes a nightmare. And then Tintin has his own premonitions and telepathy, and we have characters like Blessed Lightning. But what sets it entirely apart, as a graphic text from, say, other saving a friend kind of a narrative, or a friend in distress kind of a narrative, is the real journey, the epic expedition to Tibet. And the journey, the epic expedition, is internal. It is Tintin's unshakable conviction that Chang, his very dear friend, lives, that Chang has survived the plane crash. Captain Haddock, the sailor, initially reluctant, considers Tintin's idea as something crazy, and he resists. But ultimately, it is his unwavering loyalty, his cool determination to give up his life to save Tintin. If he's willing to give up his life to save Tintin, that is absolutely praiseworthy. Undeniably, there is no real villain in Tintin in Tibet. We do not encounter Tintin's arch enemy. There is no criminal mastermind or arch enemy like Rasta populace here. But then, in Tintin in Tibet, there is Tintin holding fast to his convictions that despite everyone else's doubts, skepticism, pessimism, and all the characters, they come up with all kinds of consistently flawless logic that Chang couldn't have survived the plane crash. Even faced with this merciless perils of nature, all kinds of blizzards and snowstorms and avalanche, you have the towering Himalayas, which is foregrounded, and Tintin perseveres. There is Tintin's loyalty, unflinching resolve to save his friend Chang, and on the other hand, we have Captain Haddock's loyalty to Tintin. In this epic journey, despair, grief, dismay, helplessness are expressed both visually and in words. So, for us, I think for all of us, Tintin in Tibet is believing in following your heart, even at a great personal risk. In popular culture, when we think of the Yeti, it is a ferocious, unforgiving beast. There's a lot of danger in the cave of the Yeti. In Nepal, they call this creature the Yeti, and in Tibet, they call it the Migu. So, at one particular point in the text, the Yeti has stolen Captain Haddock's whiskey bottle, and the captain starts yelling at this, unknown, unseen creature, the Yeti, and he addresses the Yeti as the drunken old ape, the vampire, the kleptomaniac, the cannibal, the body snatcher, so on and so forth. He hurls all kinds of abuses, imagining the ape's brutal physical strength and agility. It it actually points to the Western skepticism, a kind of Western skepticism, of Captain Haddock, his sense of superiority towards an alien, non-human creature. But here, the Yeti takes on a new unassigned role. The Belgian cartoonist Herge, or Georges Remy, has not portrayed the Yeti as a monstrous other, but the Yeti is depicted as a caregiver, a nurturer who has feelings. Chang says at the end, had the Yeti not been there, I would have died of cold and hunger. So the Yeti is no abominable snowman, but in Chan's words, a poor snowman, a wild animal with a human heart. And at the end, when Chang recovers and his party is leaving, the lonely Yeti observes their departure from afar. Very touching and emotional moment. A mild pathos is also evoked. And I think it has stirred the hearts of billions. And the Yeti is, I think, is actually symbolic of humanity's propensity to ostracize the unknown. Haj is brilliant, when he makes us share the subject position of the Yeti in the last frame, because as a non human carnivorous creature, it has not devoured Chan, but with human emotions, I think the Yeti may be fully included in the humanistic discourses. I would just wrap up and then hand over the session to Sharbujita by saying that none of us can ignore the fun elements in this graphic text, the comic elements where Snowy is sipping whiskey from Captain Haddock's broken bottle and falling tipsy or getting very easily distracted by a bone. But we all know how Snowy remains an unfailing companion to Tintin. Then we have Professor Calculus, a man ahead of his times and inhabits a world of his own. He lives in a world of scientific reasoning. He has a very minor presence in Tintin in Tibet. Short of hearing, there is always a communication gap between him and the other characters. Whenever Tintin utters Chang, in the initial part of the story, Professor Calculus mistakes it for champagne. So Captain Haddock's tendency to speak in alliterations, which we are all familiar, his whimsical, ingenious curses, billions of blue blistering barnacles or 10,000 thundering typhoons. All this is so hilarious. So, while Hirsch's visuals and artwork are always a joy, they have always been a source of pleasure. There is always an added depth and richness to them. Several panels in Tintin in Tibet are just absolutely breathtaking. The coloring is splendidly stimulating. If you look at the color scheme, it is combined with a very imaginative, detailed, stunning visuals. So I would just like to say that there is a perfect balance of words and evocative images. Emotional content is very well poised with all kinds of spectacular graphics. I'm sure Sharbojitda will talk in detail about these aspects, and he will also talk about his own works as a graphic artist. So now, Sharbojita, the stage is all yours, and I would request you to continue your presentation, to begin your presentation. Thank you very much.
So should I take over? Okay. So thank you everybody. Thank you team Inspirare India. And just a few words to start with. Right since the day Devashish gave me a first phone call to invite me to this event, I told Devashish, let it be very clear, I told Devashish categorically that there are a few things I must say about myself. One, I am not a Tintinophile because I didn't have any idea about why Tintin is being cited by the side of my works or whatever. I mean, I had an impression that you all wanted to know about my own journey as an artist through the world of graphic narratives, that too in Calcutta, in an Indian perspective. So I told Devashish, and usually I say the same thing to anybody who invites me, and that I'm not, I don't believe in any teacher trip. So please don't mind the language. Usually I love and prefer colorful sessions, chats or addas in Bengali. Uh, be they uh, be they young students from the NID or from Calcutta University or from St. Xavier's College or from SRFT or whatever. I believe in exchange, just an exchange of ideas, stories, and so on. I would very much love to peep inside the mind of these young readers and possible writers, maybe in the days to come. So it will not be, it may not be a very articulate sort of lecture, quote unquote, since I do not happen to be a teacher in that sense. And so most of it will sound like some sort of rambling about so many stories, and stories will get inside other stories. Stories will dissolve from one reference to another to yet another, and so on and so forth. This sort of cross stitch will often happen. So please bear with it. And uh, and when I came to feel that no, Tintin is very much going to be here. Uh, Coincidentally, my first ever comic book was very much inspired by Tintin, and moreover, the publisher guy wanted to make Tintin as almost a thumb rule for the making of his, for the publication of his first book, with me as the chief artist. So, but that's a different story. I'll come to it later. I would very much like to say that when Tintin, if you want to say, if you want to get something out of me about Tintin, it will be a very synchronistic sort of reading, you know, not a very diachronic sort of reading. Like there have been many articles, many critical essays on Tintin. Each and every book has been dissected, analyzed, interpreted, and so on. So naturally, in all these years, I too have had to go through a few articles, a few books. Like right now, Pradipta was saying a lot of things from Michael Farr, and she said it beautifully. So I'm coming to this part of Tintin, but then since I am not a Tintinophile, it may not be a very articulate sort of lecture on Tintin or discourse on Tintin. Tintin worked as a very big basic inspiration for my first comic book. This major inspiration continued for a few years, and once again it came back partly just a few years ago when I was invited by a Calcutta-based publisher to produce another big mainstream comic book for the young adult readers. Urge constantly came to my mind, but then not verbatim. So many other styles also wanted to be wanted to find their way in, and I did that. Now to go for Tintin, and Akash, are you there? Akash is there.
Akash.
Hello.
Yeah, Akash is there.
Akash
Hello,
is there.
Akash.
is there.
Okay.
Also, Akash, can you hear me, Akash? Akash, can you hear me?
Yes, he can hear you. He's saying he can hear you. Yes.
So if I just go on, when I say slide 1, slide 2, he will be taking the cue and he will be clicking it on. Isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So Akash can start with slide 1, and yeah, like that. Just I go on talking. After some time, I'll be going on to slide 2, but I'll tell you. So, in any case, Pradipta was saying a few things, very interesting things about Tintin in Tibet. One thing, she also talked about the color palette, and there I cannot I cannot resist my temptation to say a few things about the color palette of Tintin in Tibet. You must have noticed a very surprising presence of white, the screaming white, as Herge says, white in Tintin in Tibet. Such white has never been used in any other Tintin book. And there was a backstory to it. If we go back to Herge's own diary, or his own accounts of his own life, uh, many of us may know that Herge was going through a terrific turmoil during those days when he was going to face separation from his first wife of so many years. And he was in deep, because he was from a very orthodox Christian family, I mean, with orthodox notions and beliefs, set of beliefs, and the very concept, the very the idea of a separation or a divorce was almost sacrilegious to him. Uh, so slide 2. I'm just at random, I'm going through some early sketches, some bare black and white line drawings of Tintin, of Herge, to give the students at least some idea about the early works of Tintin when Tintin was serialized in a newspaper in the children's section in a supplement of a French or a, yeah, of course, La Vingt there it was running. It was running in complete comic. Some just 2-3 decks most probably were allotted to it. So from there to the color version, yeah, it's a question of time. There were so many years that went through. Slide 3. And Tintin, that way. Tintin in Tibet, since Devashish or Inspirare very much insisted on my dwelling on Tintin in Tibet, let me wind it up with a few words. Like Tintin in Tibet, there have been so many things, as I was telling you, so many things have already been said, and Tintin has been analyzed and scanned from so many points of view by so many critics, along with Hergé's, ways of looking at things during those years, the Western gaze, and so on and so forth. But it drags us down to a very thick and very prolonged discussion, and this is not the right place, and this is not the right time for that. I think so. So I would very much love to cut it short, and I would very much love to come to Tintin in Tibet, just a few slides, chiefly for the students. Many of them, most probably, they must have gone through the book already, and many of other Tintin books. But still, then, just to give them a feel of the early pages of Tintin, I would request Akash slide 3, or I don't know if it's slide 3, slide 4. Next slide. Yes, maybe like this one from Congo. Once again, a very controversial sort of book. Herge also felt quite uncomfortable in his later years, and so on. Next slide, please. Yes, now you get a clue of Chang and Tintin's first meet in Blue Lotus, the fragment of Blue Lotus when Tintin is saying goodbye to Chang. He is really feeling sorry, and teardrops are rolling from his eyes, and that's too sentimental, and so on. And most probably, Tintin in Tibet is most probably the only book, as Pradipta was also saying, where there is no villain. There is no such thick line drawing like black and white. There is no such thing. It's a tribute to friendship. It just goes on like a song. And then next slide, please. Yes, that is in America. Also, see, you can see the students. You can see on your left the very first version, the comic strip version, when Herge used to run this strip in the children's supplement of this Vinti MA, and later the color production of Herge Studio. So, say the next slide, please. Yeah, once again, Congo. So these are the controversial things. Like later, maybe that's once again I'm addressing the students. Maybe later you will come to know that the first frame from the strip shows the blackboard where Tintin teaches the students, the local students, the African students, the European map, particularly with a particular focus on Belgium. Later, Herge gave it a second thought. Many years later, when the colored version was coming out in book format, he changed the thing, went for a very plain and simple mathematical equation. Next slide, please. So that is the complete mature Tintin look, and that is the look what fetched our, we came to know, at least personally speaking, I came to know Tintin in my young days from such look. And this was the first thing that really attracted me, not only me, millions of readers like us, because naturally we did not have any chance to go through the black and white comic strips so many years ago, which were regularly published in some French newspaper or children's supplement. So from here, I would like to go for the next. Is there any slide left? Akash, next slide, please. Yeah. That is the complete finished Tintin from Herge Studios. Next slide, please. Yeah. The just to give a feel of the characters to the students in particular. Next slide, please. That is Tintin in Tibet, and a mind-blowing frame, the frame which has won the heart of the entire comic-loving world. It says so many things. So I am not going into many details about this frame or Tintin in Tibet, because major things have already been discussed by Pradipta, and I agree. I fully agree with all the points. Only there were a few other things, like she talked about some. Next slide, please. She talked about the journey of Tintin, and what was that? Some mysticism or something like that she was trying to touch upon. Next slide, please. Yes, we all know what was happening in Kathmandu when they were on their way to Tibet. Yes, next slide, please. That's it, the precarious journey. The color palette, of course. Next one, please. that is it. Now the predominance of white. White is taking the major part of the total area. And the next one, most probably the last one, I think. Slide. Yeah, that is it. That is breathtaking, just breathtaking. And Urge was very much, he was madly in love with details. So not a single inch or not a single millimeter was left, unstudied, unresearched on. Though use of DC-30, this very particular craft, going for a crash, later put Urge into some sort of trouble because only from this same book I came to know a very fascinating thing. One representative of the Air India or Air Indian Airlines or Air India, something like that, most probably Indian Airlines, he was sent to Urge and he complained to Urge about this sort of thing. He said it was a bad portrayal of the DC-30s, and there was really a DC-30 sort of thing with Indian with this Indian Airlines sort of this service. And he said it's bringing in bad reputation. It's creating a bad reputation for us uh, we never have had such crash so far. So Hertz later had to go for some sort of change. He changed the name of the craft. Now, all these things, I had to say all these things just as a Tintin lover, not as a critic. First of all, please try to keep it in mind. I'm addressing the students particularly. I am I am very much a working artist. Now, from here, if I go to my own journey, which was very strictly based on, I mean, highly, I mean, there was a chance meeting with a young man um, who was a mad guy sort of thing, who wanted to come out with a Calcutta version of Tintin with very little money and a lot of big things. It just goes on like a fairy tale, a very funny story. But then I don't know. You please keep a track of time, Devashish, Pradipta. I am addressing you.
Sure,
So
sure, sure.
and this is I'm getting into my personal story. Is there any problem? Because
No,
otherwise I
no.
can pick up. Right.
Please continue, Sarbajit.
Yeah. So now I shift the camera from Urge to a mundane suburban household of mine or ours long ago in the mid 80s. Before that, I had already been doing little bit of comics and cartoons, comic strips here and there, and so on. Suddenly, it was a strange thing. I mean, suddenly I found out a small advertisement in the newspaper. It was a classified ad where someone was looking. It was a box number was given, and someone was looking for an artist for the making of a comic book. It was just very plain and simple. It was written in few words like wanted an artist for the making of a comic book. So I took interest. I thought, what is it? And it was only a box number. I applied, and just within 2 3 days, a postcard, mind it, a postcard reached my address. And there was some guy who wanted to see me as soon as possible, and his name was written down there, Kedawala, JP Kedawala. I was a bit astonished, like, who could it be? Why so hurry? I sat tight on the letter, I did not go. And after a few days, once again, another letter came, and he was really insisting on my going and paying him a visit and said, no, please, I think the letter must have been lost in transit. So you please try to come over to my place. So to cut a long story short, I went there. I discovered he was a Parsi guy, 2 years near to me academically from the same college in Calcutta. And I came to know that he was madly in love with Tintin, and he had spent quite a few years as an accountant in different parts of the USA, and later he was transferred to by the same company to Tehran, Iran. And there, he was just simply, he was rigorously saving some money with only one dream in his mind so that he can come back to Calcutta with whatever is in his pockets and come out with a full length, 4-color comics publication, just like Tintin, a Calcutta version of Tintin. I was amazed because, and when he was talking about the Tehran of those days, when Khomeini was getting in and there was a lot of bloodbath on the street, I was amazed. I thought, I told him, look, man, you cannot go for a comics like this. You know, you need to set up a team. You need a team of artists. You need a space. How can you are, it is never a one-man job. He says, no. By that time, he had already got a feel of my style of drawing, and I did it very fast. Usually, I draw fast. He wanted me to do something for him. I did it just instantly and in color. And he said, no, nothing doing. I'm not going to leave you, and you have to stick to me. And so that is it. I did not like the story lines, but he was brilliant on making the stories and with me as the chief artist. So that is how the journey of Timpa started. Just a second, the Tintin has been called an imperialist role model of European white chauvinism, even though these tendencies, oh my God. So such big questions have already started springing up. So if it is going to be a 35 or 40 minute long session, then I think getting in deep inside a question like this is going to take up an entire evening. Is everybody ready for that? Or I am not ready for any academic discourse, as I told you right at the outset. Is it okay? I mean,
Sarbajit, we want to know about your journey as an artist. So please continue your discussion.
yeah, so
We can
otherwise,
have the questions later. We can have the questions later. Not
like
now.
this,
You
white
please
chauvinism,
continue.
I keep it in my mind, but then I have already said that Urge had to face a few problems, some critical reviews, some criticism, even later, much later. And Urge, most of the times, he was very apologetic. He used to correct and change and alter so many things. Like I talked about this DC-30, it's a very small incident, but he was embarrassed with Congo. He was embarrassed with land of the Soviets. But anyways, that is again distracting me. So let it wait for some time. I To get back to Teen Park, I I knew that I had to do it, and he wanted to come out with a 42 or 44 page long book, Tintin size, 4 color. I did not have any computer naturally, out of question, in the mid 80s. A small table I only had, nothing else. Sitting at home, I was also working in an office that time. So taking some time out of that office and working on these comics was, uh, exciting for me. It was really exciting because I loved this clean line drawing of Urge, and I always thought of, if what if I could draw something like this, something like Urge and all that. He was a role model almost, but I did not want to copy verbatim. I never. So then we had to come out with a set of characters from Calcutta. Now, about the characters from Calcutta, naturally, I knew that each and every character would have to be very believable, so that a young boy who can be an independent reporter in Belgium can be easily accepted uh, by the readers all over. But when in Calcutta, I am catering to the Indian children, I'm catering to the Indian young adults to readers. I know there has to be some sort of a believability of the central character. At least I wanted that. So there were prolonged debates, many debates and quarrels later, and uh, many debates later. We always used to have very friendly fights, and after a lot of trouble, the black and white line drawing was done, and the black and white line drawings were exact double the size of the exact print page size. So you know what I mean. It was a big sheet where I had to go for the entire full page drawing, deck by deck, tier by tier. From there, we had to go. I mean, then once it was done, he took all the sheets to the printer. Just within a few days, he turned up again with a long face and said, the printer says it's going to cost him a lot of money. And he did not have the money. Money like what? For scanning, because they were all done in color. So they were all done in color. So for the, any problem there? Is it audible?
No, no. Audible.
Audible. So I precisely came to know that he could not afford anything for the scanning part, and scanning was costly, of course. Excuse me. What I did, the printer gave us the exact book size diapositive frames which looked like transparent or very transparent, sheets, plastic sheets with just black line drawings on that, along with the speech balloons. And he wanted to do me the entire painting manually, which means, ultimately what I had to do, I got hold of my camera. I mean this table. I turned it upside down. Fortunately there was a platform in between. I got hold of a thick glass sheet which was fitting to the T. I put it on the four legs of the table. So it started working as a light box because I was lighting a table lamp just facing upward through. I mean, so the light was helping me to look at the black and white line drawings on the diapositive frames on which I had to place white maplitho or bond papers. I mean, for one single reason, those papers were user friendly, very thin, but at the same time, a good quality, lot of slight grains and all. So it was nice to work on such papers. And I was supposed to work with opaque colors and then fill up each and every millimeter, inch by inch, millimeter by millimeter with opaque color, because otherwise the printer's camera will not, register it. The plate will not be prepared. This way, I had to do all alone this sort of a meticulous painting for 42 or 44 pages. The book was ultimately published. When it came out in the market, we liked the first look of it at first, but very soon my heart sank because I knew it was terrible drawing. I did not like it. So, Akash, may I go to Timpa Red Hooded Gang? Akash, next, yeah, this one. So my heart sank because I knew this is not what I wanted. It was poor drawing, and even now when I look back at it, I feel very embarrassed. Like it is not working. Next, please. Yeah, the cover. See, I had to do that. Even the title I had to do with hand, manually, which I did not like at all. Next, please. Yeah, these are the central characters. Like he wanted a young star, almost as old as Tintin, to be the hero of the story, and he wanted just another replacement of Haddock. But I told him we cannot go for copy work like this. And this boy, which part of society is this boy coming from? This boy cannot be an independent reporter out here. Calcutta mindset is not for that. So he has to be placed very much comfortably in a middle class Kolkata house, where a Haddock, after much discussion, I made him decide or settle on a very peevish, very irritable sort of grandfather who often loses temper, and he is often acting as a foil of this boy, this Timpa's adventures or daring do's, and so on. Next, please. The next slide, please. Yes, this is the thing that I loved and I still now love. I mean, I always love to go for details, and I did not. I those days I did not have yet my own camera, so I took a friend with his camera, and I went and paid visits to the race course, even the Eden Parade ground, and so on. Took real photographs of the Lal Bazar police station, and I wanted the city to look like an authentic Kolkata. Next, please. Yeah, for such things, I always prefer to go for photo references. The same old story. And next, please. This is all very much influenced by Hergé's color palette. I was obsessed with Hergé's use of soft colors and so on, and the use of this sort of soft, very bland colors. And I tried to do, and now once again you try to remember the way I painted on the white sheets placed on the diapositive frames. Each and every color, each and every corner of it was done with an opaque color, with a light below, and you are painting on top. You won't get, you won't be able to decide the color. They all look dark. They all look very blackish. So next, please. This is yet another. I must admit, any riverscape or seascape by Herge always fascinated me. Just fascinated me. And I even paid suddenly I remembered while arranging these pages for today's event. I suddenly remembered, yeah, I got hold of a camera and, oh no, not even a camera, my sketchbook, and went to the port area with the help of another senior friend who was working in a shipping company to get an intimate look inside a motorboat or a steamboat and small launch and so on. Next, please. Yeah, that is it. That is how it's coming to an end. So now we go on to the next one. The next one, please, Akash. Yes, the same will start. The next one. That is the second book I worked on, Operation Rescue. But by that time, I had already convinced Jahangir to form a team at least. But it was a team. I mean, we got two artists, one for the finish line drawing, another for major line drawing was always done by me. I remember one young guy who was taking care of just cleaning the things. And there was yet another to do the coloring sort of thing that I had to do for the first volume. Next, please. Yeah, it was kind of an exotic sort of thing, like Operation Rescue, as the title suggests. So the next one, I'm just going for a quick glance of the things I had to do. Yeah, that is how. There was only one, the presence of only one female character in the entire story. That too, very, very not a very prime character, and that is the Lal Bazar Police Headquarters showing out there. No, that's the writers' building, and the only female character out here is Timpa's mother, who is a very peace-loving, housewife, runs a family, looks after the family, and so on. And his father is a police inspector, so naturally there is a backup force in a way. So next, please. That is how this one. Yeah, there is yet another. Next slide. Anything else is there? So that is all about Timpa. Now, if you ask about Timpa, and I have told you everything, because Timpa for me is just it's a big memory. I feel nostalgic because it takes me back to those days and so many anecdotes and so many events and memories and moments, and so that's a complete book in itself. And yeah, that is the rescue operation going to take place. I mean, just a very favorite character of Timpa's was supposed to be rescued by Timpa and his daring grandfather, and the story did not hold water much, but I loved working on the details, and I was absolutely addicted to comics, and still now I am. So next one, is there anything left? Yeah, that's it. I think that's it. Uh, so from here, yes, that's the operation, that's the rescue operation going on. All manually done, no help of computer. I did not feel very comfortable with the storyline even, but then after all, we joined hands and it was fun going together. But then to shift a little bit from this, after this, after many, I mean, just after this, I had an offer from Vernacular Daily in the city to run a weekly comics strip for the children's section, for a children's supplement of theirs, and I was given a much bigger space, like two tiers, two decks, and black and white. I this time I had full liberty. I created my own story. I created my own characters, and I just went the way I wanted to go. The children picked it up. They loved it. I also loved it. Timpa, I did not really, frankly telling you, Timpa, I did not like very much. And still now I feel a bit uneasy because they look very amateurish and very poor and weak and drawing wise and so on. But then there are many memories attached to it and they have their own validity. I cannot say no to it. And what happened with Timpa was yet another thing I must say. Uh, Slowly, very slowly, my friend who was the publisher, I mean, who was the writer of this book, did not have a very strong cash power and he was not a very strong businessman in that sense about publication and all. He had little idea. So he used to carry books to different bookshops and dump a few books out there. Just after a few days, he used to go and take some report from them, like how is it going. But suddenly we discovered that we were getting flooded by letters, fan mails from little children, school children, and so on, from many parts of the country. Much to our amazement, we could not believe, so far as I remember, there were quite a few letters from the Northeast. And I was so surprised, like I wondered how on earth could they have got hold of Timpa sitting somewhere in Assam or in Mizoram. Letters came, very much letters came from Tamil Nadu, from Chennai, from Bangalore and Mumbai, and so on. Time rolled by. After many years, once again, I faced very funny situations. Like I remember just hardly say 8 or 10 years ago, maybe, there was a big comic presentation event, at Mumbai IIT, where I was invited for my own presentation. There, I suddenly chanced upon three young guys, all from one from Delhi and two from Chennai. They were very enthusiastic, full of zeal. They were working. They got hold of me. They got themselves introduced, and they said that they were working on a documentary, a non-fiction on the graphic novelists or comics artists in India. And they were very surprised to know that I happened to be the same Sarbajit whose Timpa they adored and loved in their school days. They also used to run their own small library. They formed this library and they compiled comics, their own favorite comics from here and there. And that is how they got hold of Timpa. And they told me they were very excited. They said, we cannot believe that it is you because we thought you must have been dead cold. Deep under the sea. So I says, no, man, I'm very much alive and kicking. So that is what happens. I remember when I was working in a different office near the New Market, there was a bookstore where I happened to take a lady with her little daughter, and this my relative, in fact. So this little daughter was very much a bookworm, and she was looking for comics and little books this way, that way, and all that. And this store was a known store, run by two immaculate Bengali gentlemen, brothers, dhoti, Punjabi, specs, bald, and so on, and very friendly. So they knew me because my office was just opposite their shop. And suddenly I discovered there was one copy of Timpa in a bookshelf. And I just almost in a muttering retreat, I whispered to the ears of this little kid, hey, take a look, take a look. And this gentleman took notice of it and he said, what is it? So I said, no, I was just showing her this book. And the man didn't have any idea, the gentleman. He says, do you have any idea about what happened to this book? Just a few copies came to my shop and all the copies sold, all the copies sold in no time. But then the gentleman who brought those copies never came back. I did not tell him that I happened to be the artist of this book that was lying in his bookshelf. So such anecdotes and such memories are always there. They abound. But that is not all. I mean, time rolls by, and from there, comics emerged as a different language, a mode of expression for me, and comics definitely is a language for me. So it depends on me what I am going to express. I need to tell a story. That's the thing. And now, what sort of story I am going to cater, or anybody wants to cater, is the writers lookout, the writers concert. And I do have some issues. I do have some. I very much love to look at comics as a uh, as a as a as a very serious sort of language. And the ultimately at the end of the game, it's just like telling a story. Now the story has to be strong. The stronger the story, the better for the artist and for the readers. So I, in the meantime, slowly comics was emerging as yet another frontier in front of me. Kolkata was not really ready, not really prepared for comics in this form, and people had some sort of resistance, some sort of blocks in their mind. Sorry to say, still now there is most probably this sort of a block in the mind of many people. And moreover, there has been some other problematic things, like suddenly another word has come to the forefront: graphic novel, which whoever knows about comics, the basic history of comics, definitely knows about Will Eisner, who coined the words graphic novel, and under which circumstance he had to coin these words, during which phone conversation with which publisher, and so on and so forth. In fact, comics and graphic novels, there is no difference in between the two. For me, comics are of two types. One of mainstream entertaining sort of thing for the general people. No problem. There is no problem. It's not a sin to entertain people, to go for a mainstream job, because artists need to survive. And again, there are alternative stories, stories that I believe in. Stories which are messages for me, which messages I want to impart in the minds of my readers. And there, this is also comics with potent stories, comics with strong stories, and so on. So in between, I worked on many things, but then I'm sorry, because the tech team out here is having some space problems. So that is why many of the clips that I had sent cannot be projected, or otherwise I could have shown you some relevant themes that I really loved working on, like A Pilgrim's Progress, which I did for Dridhanchu. Absolutely, it's out and out a comics journal, which lasted for 3 years, brought out by some comics fanatics from Jadavpur University. They invited me, and everybody was contributing. I contributed. It's about it's about displacement. So I'm just giving you the highlights of my subjects. Pilgrim's Progress is about displacement, and displacement comes very often in my stories. And I don't feel very comfortable creating stories out of the blue, unless there is some sort of a piece of known reality, my lived reality. I don't feel very comfortable. So somehow, even the latest story that I'm working on for an anthology is absolutely springing up from a real life event, 100%. From there, I took off. So from Pilgrim's Progress, once again, I can think about another two-page graphic narrative which I did for the Bhopal gas tragedy. Many of us definitely remember what happened in 1984, but perhaps the worst industrial disaster in the world, even worse than Chernobyl. And instant death was reported to be more than 2,500. Deaths continue in many ways. I'm not going into this, because so many deformed children were taking birth, and so on and so forth. Just a few years ago, the Supreme Court fully exempted everybody of charges, all charges. I went mad, and just at that time, a friend from an NGO wanted me to do some comics for them. I told him, I was sitting in anger. I told him, if you want me to do something for your journal, it's a like-minded journal with the same agenda. I told him, I'm not going to shift an inch from the Supreme Court's verdict. I came out with my own attack on the legislature ministry nexus, and the big corporate guys always getting the free route, where Warren Anderson was given absolutely a free passage from India, and he was totally exempted. Nothing happened to any of them. So after that, the most important work that I did, in my estimate, was a very big. It was mostly 52-page long graphic novel on climate politics. titled Carbon Chronicles. Uh, it once again, there was an international NGO working behind it. Um, uh, that's a different story. Perhaps we are running short of time. I'm not making the story.
Sarbajita, can I just interrupt you for a moment?
Yeah, of
Uh,
course, please.
Sarbajita, we have the Dodo clips ready. You wanted to show the Dodo clips?
Did I, before going to Dodo, just a few words about the other words like carbon is about climate politics. Fellow diarists, once again, it was for an literary journal from Dhaka, and they wanted to introduce graphic narratives, so I did fellow diarists. For following the box was the place. I mean, following the box invited my works, and I had to go there twice, to Chicago and to Los Angeles, with these works. And once again, it was about, I'm not going into the subject, but it's again, you will be getting the same references to displacement and the plight of the common people, the subjugated common man, and so on. From there, that I can once again, the latest job to have ever been published was Dodo and Food Fetish. In fact, the concept was deep down there in my mind long ago. But then the friend who was wanting to publish it had some problems, so we had to wait. After many years, it just came out and it found a place in the anthology, the comics anthology that we uh, that is our child. You know, we four friends, long form. Dodo found a place out there, so uh, it's a black comedy. Yeah, slide please. First slide, please, Dodo. Yeah, that is how the thing starts. It's a black comedy on mm, on a very nondescript person named Dodo. Perhaps Dodo is also a significant name I deliberately gave him. So next slide, please. Yeah, Dodo does nothing. Dodo is a very common man, you know. He just from his he lives alone, a dismal and dreary sort of living in just a small flat in Kolkata. Goes to Dalhousie. Next slide, please. Coming back again, and he often tries to search out some some sort of relationships online, and he's always a poor player. He's often taken for a ride or often booed at or jeered by pranksters. Next slide, please. Mm. Yeah, so Dodo has only one weakness. For him, food is a fetish, and so much so that one day, by chance, a woman comes in his life, and she's a very open-minded, she's a very liberal sort of human being, and she has her own agenda. Like it's no nonsense business, and you know, she makes some arrangements. There are some conditions. She sets the conditions ready and says, you have to follow these conditions, and only then I'm ready to, we can give it a try. We can, it's like staying together, but no obligation, no nothing. Dodo says yes, but Dodo tries his level best to keep cool, but finally he cannot help. Next slide, please. Finally he cannot help, because in his eyes, this woman becomes some sort of she morphs into either a lobster or a chicken or some exotic food stuff. And that is when this lady just gets hold of Dodo, makes him sit, and says, "You need to go for a psychoanalysis. You please tell me, just cough out about yourself, your own childhood. There must be some sort of repression in you." And Dodo talks about his own repression, like this, the same, suburban life, and from there to his journey to the city with his dreams and disaster. I mean, dreams and despair, and so on. Next slide, please. Yeah, out here, this woman is turning into this is an yin yang kind of thing. This concept is the male female, eternal male female kind of thing. She prepares some lobster, and then some things, some disaster takes place. Dodo cannot keep his cool. Dodo bursts out, and it's a total hell breaks loose. Next slide, please. Yes. So the uh, so the lady leaves, She says, enough is enough. I'm not for you, not for this stuff. You have problems. Dodo is left alone again. And next slide, please. Unless after a few days, once again, he gets hold of yet another person online who comes in, and it's a role reversal sort of thing. Dodo never knew that she has stronger fetish. Food happened to be a stronger fetish for this person than even Dodo, where Dodo becomes a kind of an object of desire, and it's a disastrous desire. So basically, this was some kind of black comedy, and I think that is all about it. My work. Yes.
Sarbajit,
Yes.
could we wind up in a couple of minutes? Could we wind up in a couple of minutes, please? Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'm through.
Yeah.
I'm through.
So
I'm not extending it. Yeah, of course.
No. So thank you so much. I mean, it's been an enlightening journey. It's been a really enlightening journey, following in your footsteps, the way you've traced your adventures with comic books, with the graphic writing, your involvement, your evolution as an artist, and of course the initial part of the journey where Tintin was along with you, sort of as an inspiration. So and how you've moved to social causes, the Bhopal gas tragedy, to I've personally read Carbon Chronicles, and the environment being such a huge an issue in that particular created. So thank you so much. And I have kept to the time wonderfully well, actually. Welcome to the program, Pippa King. Pippa has been here for some time. I mean, she had some technical trouble getting in, but thank you, Pippa. You've managed to brave it, and you've been able to join us. Thank you so much for joining us from the UK. And from one stalwart here, Sarbajit Sen, to another stalwart, from one point of reference with Tintin and Timpa and Carbon Chronicles and Dodo, to another set of superheroes, let's put it this way. I think the year is about 1972, Pippa, and when the world of Marvel Comics actually burst into the British scene, and you were heavily involved at the very inception of that process. And
I was indeed, yes.
Could you just take us on that journey once again of reminiscence and of insight as to where we have got with Marvel, because Marvel is a huge draw these days. You know, whenever anybody Marvel
totally
to young people. So Pippa, you have about half an hour, 35 minutes. Please take us forward.
Yes. Okay. Well, I was just looking back in my diaries, which I've kept for a million years, and I found in 1972 that in July 1972, it's a great job. I can't believe my luck in getting it. Stan Lee is a charmer with a very dry sense of humour, and he thanked me for my invaluable help. Only words, but he smiled as he spoke. He was a charming man, Stan. But I got the job by chance, really. I had been working in publishing in London as a picture researcher. I'd been to art school. And then I went home. I got divorced, had children, and went home to Norfolk on the east coast of England. And a few years later, a friend of mine who'd been my sort of boss when I'd been doing picture research suddenly rang me up and said, "Oh, it's a wonderful job. You're just the person for it." And so I went for an interview in this very dark, grim office. I think it was some sort of international press agency. I think that's how it described itself, but I never saw much action there. I think whether it had some mafia connection, so it was very strange anyway. And but obviously somebody in New York, the guy who ran the bureau had an office in New York, and they obviously they wanted to do this expansion of Marvel Comics. So they looked around and they said, "Oh, well, you get someone, sort of like a glorified secretary, they could cope, So I was paid secretarial wages, which wasn't very much, but I was grateful to be employed. So I had a desk space in this rather dark office and a telex machine connecting me with the bullpen in New York. and we had a printer based in Carlisle. But the problem was that Marvel comics in those days were in full colour and were printed monthly, and it would be, you know, one. There would be lots of different comics, but there would be one superhero per comic. But they had decided for the English market that they'd do it as a weekly boys comic or sort of children's comic rather than a sort of adult version. Then they wouldn't have much cut. They'd economise, so they didn't have any colour in it except the front cover and maybe a back cover, maybe an one middle cover, but in a page. But the rest was all what's called spot colouring. So you'd have a page with had red jerseys on it. It worked, but it wasn't as good as the full colour, wonderful. But they were the original drawings from the bullpen, so they were proper. But we had terrible problems with things like the printers in Carlisle, which is miles away north of England, almost in Scotland, so a long way from London. And they managed to lose 2 pages of 1 week's comics. So that caused a great panic, and we had to have a special federal delivery for international delivery flown in from America and got it up to Carlisle in time for the printing. But it was well received, the comic. It was very popular. It was broke new ground. Nobody had sort of, I mean, before that, Marvel comics had been rather sort of a elitist thing that art school students would know about or something, not in the general run of things. And this came in right at the right level. Sort of 7 to 12-year-olds or whatever. It was, and it was very well received. It was very exciting. I beavered away at my little desk, trying to get things sorted out, and they decided they wanted a reader's page, you know, with sort of letters and things. So for the first week or two, I made up all the letters. so sort of, because that's how it was in those days. We're talking about 1972. And then when the letters did come in, they were very similar to what I'd written. So that was quite comforting. Lots of wonderful things were sent in. Sort of kids would make, get copies, they'd do their own little drawings of the Hulk or whatever. So there was amazing sort of little stitched versions of Spider-Man, I think, which I've got somewhere, but I've just moved and I was looking for them. That's why I found my diary of 1972, but I cannot find the pile of bits of memorabilia in the first editions and whatever. I'm sorry. So I've got 1 or 2 nice things, but they're stacked away somewhere. What else can I tell you? As I say, the problem was it was chopped up at the bullpen in New York and made into a weekly comic. So sometimes they weren't concentrating in New York or something, so they'd send things out of sequence. So it was my job to say, hang on, the Hulk was sent into outer space last week, and now you've got him doing something completely different without getting him back. So we had sort of little things to jig around like that. It was very enjoyable. I had a 6 months contract, and I worked very hard and didn't have any help or anything. Stan Lee came over one time, and so we went and had lunch in a very expensive West End restaurant. And there was me and Stan Lee and the printers from Carlisle and one of the big boss men from this international bureau. So we were quite a strange little quartet. And Stan had just flown in, actually, so he probably had jet lag, poor man. And they all sort of like a good, expensive kind of meal, have steak and everything. And Stan said, no, I just want fruit salad. And I could see why, but they were all totally shocked, like, oh, what is this strange man who only eats fruit salad? And then when he was over at that same time, I had connections with various London art schools and things. So I got hold of Central School of Art, which is right at the in the middle of London. It's now called Central St Martin's, but in those days it was called Central School of Art. And they were thrilled to have Stan to go and give them a lecture. And he was a bit late, so everyone was getting a bit restless. Was the great man going to turn up? And I saw him coming along the corridor. So I had an LP of a Marvel comic tunes. And as he came in, I put on the Spider-Man one, and so that sort of gave him walking down the aisle with his Spider-Man song going. It was a good moment. And he was a very delightful person, Stan. He really was. I mean, obviously an absolute genius, but a quiet, gentleman as well. So, what else? I made some more notes. Let me have a look. It's mainly. Oh, well, yes, then they decided after I'd worked there 6 months, and they would go, oh, I should have said they've introduced another comic with Spider-Man. They expanded, it was so successful, they began to expand their range of comics. So they were going to do 2 comics. And I said, yeah, fine, I can do 2 comics, but I'll need a sort of assistant editor or whatever. And the man who was the sort of big white chief of the big boss man of this strange international press agency didn't like me. I was probably a bit too smart for him. I wasn't a little dolly bird, really. And so and he called me into his office and said, we're going to think of this. What do you think about it? I said, well, great, but I'll need another person to help because we're getting a bit tight, lot to do and things. So he said, right, well, I want you to write down every single thing you do, so validate your job. And I said, oh, well, okay, I can go do that. So I wrote down this, seriously, I do this, and then I have to do that, and then I have to check with a bull pen, and then I have to look at the telexes, and then I have to answer all the letters, and then I have to make sure everything's in sequence, and so on and so forth. And I handed it to him, and he said, right, thanks, you're fired. So end of story, really. And then they had to get lots more people in after me. It grew from there to two graphic designers and a whole different thing. But I was the first person that set it off, and I enjoyed every moment of it. So I don't know. Does anybody want to ask me any questions or anything? It's a bit perhaps it was too quick a talk, but I don't know. Yes. I think that's about all my. It was a long time ago, 1972. So I think that's. Yeah, I'm sorry to be so short, but is that any? Does anybody want to ask me any questions about that? Oh.
1972. 1972. To put things in perspective, I was even born.
Neither was I born in 1972.
Even born. July 1972. Still 1 year before I was born. So, but just tell me, Pippa. I mean, when did Captain Britain take place? Was it in your time or later, or when was Captain Britain? I mean, I think one of the Marvel characters that emerged.
Later, yes.
Captain Britain. Was it at?
It was really, we were taking the classic Marvel comic heroes. The Fantastic Four, the Hulk, Spider-Man, the Silver Surfer, I think came in later, but they were just trying it with what they knew worked, really. They didn't, when I was there, they hadn't introduced any new, it was all original cut-ups from original monthly Marvel comics.
Right.
So, and somewhere I've got some artwork, but I can't find it, sorry.
It's fine, Pippa. It's all right. Pradipta, I think we can move to any questions. Do you see any questions on the bar? Anybody?
I have noted one question for Sarbajit Da. So shall we proceed with that question? I don't know, like whatever you want me to do.
Yeah, I mean we can proceed with the question.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
Okay. That's for Tintin.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank Sarbajit Da and Madam Pippa King for such fascinating presentations. Thank you so much for being with us in Inspirare India. So we now move on to the question answer session, and we request our audience to please come up with their questions. I have noted one question already. Uh, before I spell out that question for Shorbujit, this is something which I also wanted to talk about. Um, the coloring. Sharbujita, you were talking about the color scheme of Tintin in Tibet. Hmm. And the coloring is
Yes.
splendidly stimulating, if we can say that, And I found the coloring of the adventures of Timpa also, you said it is all manually done, and I don't know how you managed to achieve that level of perfection manually. Uh, it was it was really something, the adventures of Timpa. And so I was wanting to ask you that, when we think of Tintin in Tibet, particularly the color scheme, I have observed how the pink hue of New Delhi, say for instance, with reds and pale purples give way to the yellow and the cream in Kathmandu, which again fades into pastel greens before exploding into brighter shades when our heroes set out on their journey. Captain Haddock and Tintin set out on their journey. And the Himalayas are a symphony of white and blues and grays. The cover page of Tintin, this one. The Himalayas are a symphony of white and blues and grays, and of course, you have the footmarks of the Yeti here in light shade of blue, the footmark of the Yeti. And the Lama sections, when you go to the Lama sections, we note the heavy reds and purples, heavy red and purple color of the Lamas. So, what I was wanting to ask you, and the question is also something similar, I found the entire adventures of Timpa that you showed on screen, it was absolutely fascinating. And the question is, again from Tintin in Tibet, that is white a character? I mean, he or she is asking about the color. Is white a character in itself other than
Yes.
a color? I mean, is Tintin's
Yes,
entirely
of course.
white dreams, do they represent a turmoil of character? Something. So, would you like to comment on that?
Yes. Lot of things can be said in this regard. Um, um, Artists from the domain of art, definitely with some thoughts, will be coming out with different answers and interpretations of color. Now, is white a color or not, can be taken to a big scientific height, like if white is or is not a color. But using of white in such big expanse, it definitely is a very challenging job. And coming from one to another, I mean, suppose we were talking about the use of pink and red,
Mhm.
particularly in Nepal and Delhi. Okay, so
Mhm.
Nepal and Delhi, you just try to think about the dominant color schemes of these two places. So we are familiar with the kind of colors that predominate in these areas. Like you think about Rajasthan, you'll be absolutely a different color palette will be playing in your mind. So it's just like that. So that way, the portrayal of Delhi, portrayal of Nepal, this is simply fascinating. I mean, you are transported to those places. At least personally, I feel transported. Look at this Qutub Minar or look at this Red Fort and so on. And they even talk about, they have missed out on Rajghat and the reference of Mahatma Gandhi, a reference to Mahatma Gandhi. We suddenly feel very familiar. From there, when the real trek begins in Nepal, there are so many delicate issues and so many delicate things associated with all this. Like Urge in many of his works, in many of his books, there is. I am not getting into a very big issue like the Western gaze, the Oriental gaze, and all that. But the gaze, we cannot say no to the gaze. So a gaze differs from like what my gaze was. Personally, ask yourselves what your gaze was 10 years ago. Is slightly definitely bound to change a bit. It tends a bit. Tends to change a bit in the later years. So it depends on so many things. But then when Urge, whenever he takes Tintin or Haddock and some such characters to distant places, to different places. It's a different custom altogether. People's lifestyle is absolutely different. Think about the Arab lands and how Haddock behaves, how the Thompsons behave. That shows you a lot of things in between. There are so many spaces in between the lines. So at times Hirsch felt bad about it. Later he corrected himself. At times, okay, he just ignored it. But the books went on for a big sale and so on. It's a different thing altogether. In Tibet, Tintin in Tibet, when the entire canvas is slowly going for a metamorphosis from such warm colors to bland colorlessness. That is yet another terrific idea. That is a terrific execution. And now, if we want to go into further depths of this same subject, like why, how, and a little bit of psychoanalysis and all that, perhaps many of us know about this famous book named Tintin Companion. And in Tintin Companion, everything is the book itself goes like a storybook. It's so fascinating. And there, this sort of use of this color has been, I mean, there have been so many discussions and analysis about the mental turmoil that Hirsch had been going through before he started working on Tintin in Tibet. Because some time ago, I talked about the impending separation of his old partner, and at the same time, there was yet another, most probably her name was Fanny or something like that, who was half his age, a fantastic personality, and started acting as a solace to. She was a solace to Hirsch, joined the studios as an artist, and ultimately Hirsch found some peace of his mind. Before that, during that turmoil, there are memoirs of Hirsch himself. He says that his sleep was very much disturbed. It was a sleep disorder he was suffering from, and it was largely infested with so many dreams, so many scary dreams. And in most of the dreams, he says it particularly, those are white dreams. He sees all white. And in Tintin Companion, he's quoted by the author, like Hirsch is quoted like it's screaming white. Everything is turning into white. And he feels very scared. He feels very scared, as if he sees himself deep in the snow, hanging from a precipice or something, or falling into a crevasse and so on. It's a fear psychosis. And after consulting his psychoanalyst, the analyst advised him to stay away from work. He says, the only cure for you is to stop working. Please stop working. Don't work. Hirsch later says in slight good humor, he says, the only difference is that I did not stop working. So he worked. And that is how some such discussions and talks still now take place. And that is how we feel so very thrilled to talk about, to even think about an artist's use of color, the thought he used to give to his palettes. And nothing is insignificant for a great artist, for a great creator. Nothing is insignificant. Not a single pin or not a single nail is also insignificant, at least in Hirsch. He has a very formidable eye for details. And from there, you were once again talking about the Lamaistic rituals and so on and so forth. Once again, in that book, I was so amazed. I loved it so much. I was sorry for some sort of personally distracting a bit. I came across this name of a redoubtable Tibetologist named Alexandra David Neal. She was a Belgian, and she spent quite a long time in Lhasa, working on Tibetology, researching on Tibetology, and so on and so forth. And later, many years later, including this our American Allen Ginsberg and all that, this American poet, there were so many people who paid tribute to this lady. And I was thrilled, particularly I was thrilled because due to my some little bit of filmmaking, passions, I happened to work so many years on this particular Tibetan Thangka painting or this Tibetan scroll painting, which will be getting some sort of in Tintin in Tibet. Of course, if you talk about this purple, this is the red sect Buddhists. There are basically two sects. So this is the red sect sort of Buddhists. And you get the same Vajrayana type suggestions, indications, and Harj went into deep studies about this. There is, once again, there are some mischievous elements, like Harj makes just little bit of mischievous, harmless fun of a llama suddenly levitating. This levitating and seeing things is some kind of a very childish, very frivolous, some innocuous frivolity, which we don't mind, we love. Everything goes there. It's a land of magic and mystery. Because Alexander David Neal's book, I also happened to read some of his writings during my filmmaking years, and I was so thrilled to find her name out there. And Harj, I came to know that he thoroughly studied Alexander David Neal chiefly as a source of inspiration. So isn't it fascinating? That is brilliant. That is it. I mean, color palette wise. And if you ask me about Timpa's color palette, I told you right at the outset that we were blindly in love with Urge's color palette. So I wanted to go as near as possible his color schemes. And but then it was not possible for us because it was a one-man job. For me, it was a one-man job to start with. Later, it became a three-man job. So that is not the proper way to work on a big full-length comic book. You can come out with small strips and all that, but not a full-length comic book. Perhaps it looks a bit good because you get the illuminated screen in front of you. You look at the hard copy. These days, courtesy Comic Con, just a few years ago, they relaunched these two books. But the first impressions did not at all look very bright. I mean, just after coming out from the press, they looked good, they looked bright, but I was not satisfied, frankly telling you. But Comic Con production was, much more bright, and they used good pages. The paper quality was good, and they went for a digital print, so that gave it almost a different look altogether. This much I can say about the use of white, the color palette of Tintin in Tibet, and Timpa's color palette.
Thank you, Sarbajit. Sarbajita, since you mentioned Hergé's eye for detail, and when you were giving your presentation, you did show us that particular slide, which where we have Tintin and Captain Haddock are in the recreation room, and then they are playing chess. And Tintin, and since Captain Haddock is taking a lot of time to decide his next move, Tintin falls asleep, and then maybe there is he shouts Chang. And you told us
Yeah,
there are many details in that particular frame, one particular frame which you showed on screen, and you said there are many details. Now, as a very ordinary reader who is not someone who's not, a graphic designer or a graphic artist like you, what I have observed in that frame is, all characters have almost turned upside down. It is only Professor Calculus,
yes,
who is sitting in the chair and he's reading his newspaper and he's completely unperturbed. It
absolutely.
doesn't affect him at all. So, is there
Yes.
anything more to that frame? What is your view as a graphic artist?
But in fact, calculus was and still now is the most fascinating part of that entire big frame. Most fascinating. I mean, let the world go astray, no problem, because I'm blissfully settled in my own solitude, my own book, and he's lost in his own world of dreams. And that was the thing. Even in this utter chaos, the calculus stood out as an exception. I simply feel fascinated. Whenever I look at this big frame, I'm just Mm. I just don't know how to express it. And then there is this little kid on your right, most probably. The little kid is so scared that he just gives a start, and some soup bowl in his mother's hand just springs up, and the soup is splashed across her face. And this some such things. One guy just is so scared that he ducks behind the table, and just up to this is shown. And even when Tintin is leaving the room, he is just in the same position. He has not budged an inch. Such things are really amazing. And
Amazing,
you
absolutely
don't have to be an
amazing.
artist. You just keep your eyes for fun and keep the canvas open. You'll be getting your own colors.
Thank you so much, Sarbajit. We will wait for the next question. Uh,
Uh, Pradipta, before you read the question, I had a very short question for Pippa here. We can
Please,
read the
please.
question
Yes,
again
yes.
after that. Uh, uh, yes, Pippa, I mean, earlier this year, we were told that there's something called the Union, a band of UK superheroes being unveiled by Marvel earlier this year. I mean, when you were at the helm in the early 70s, did you ever think of doing something on these lines, having a very UK kind of a British view of things? I mean, British superheroes, instead of directly using figures who had become important or interesting or popular in America already. Were you planning to do something on those lines at that time?
No, because the whole idea was to bring American superheroes to the UK. At that time, we had Beano and Dandy and sort of comics that look backwards, really. Champion and sort of things that have really always going on since 1900s, most of them. And this was completely revolutionary. It was just it was, at the moment, the zeitgeist, it was just the thing to do at that moment. And it was very experimental. There were questions as to whether, if it had bad language in it, would it be educationally, put down and things. So we had quite deep discussions about its position, how it was going to fit into the comic market in the UK. And I think they were just amazed that it was, that's like they just had me because they thought it wasn't, they just try it. They just sort of put their toe in the water. And it did incredibly well. So then they sort of saw that they could expand into, but at the time they were just looking back to recycle what they had already. I mean, it never would have occurred to us in 72 that be Spider-Man movies and the whole, there was no idea. I don't think even Stan Lee envisaged this complete explosion into different areas of the media and things. It just was, comics were his love, and the bullpen were all beavering away back in New York. And somewhere I've got a lovely letter from them thanking me for all my hard work, but I can't find it, so you just have to take my word for it. But no, I think this is from 1972 to the early 90s. I mean, there's such a vast change in media internet connection. Well, the internet began sort of mid to late 90s, didn't it? But I mean, the whole sort of explosion is just unthought of in the 70s. Totally.
Thank you so much, Pippa. Pradipta, if you will go ahead with the next question, please.
Hold on for a moment.
Yeah, I think it's to do with no villains in Tintin, if I'm not very mistaken.
Yes, I got the question. Which of the many villains in the Tintin series do you consider the most interesting? I think it's for Sarbajita, but Pippa Madam can also answer it. Well, is comfortable with the question, can take up this question. Which of the many villains in the Tintin series do you consider the most interesting?
Sorry again. Sorry, your voice.
Yeah, I'm telling you, which of the many villains in the Tintin series do you consider the most interesting?
Very difficult. Two stand together. One is King Ottokar's scepter, and at the same time, side by side, Tintin in Tibet. Of course, for me, I'm split between the two. I love both of them equally.
Sarbajita, I think he's asking about the villains in Tintin in Tibet.
Among the villains, even in Tintin, the Tintin villains, since my reading is very much, I told you right at the outset that it's a very synchronistic sort of reading. It's not, just issue by issue, story by story. It's a bit difficult. But Rasta Populus,
Rasta Populus, yes, Rasta Populus is there.
A lovable villain, and then this Al Capone. Al Capone later
Al Capone, right?
Al Capone was fantastic, and most amazingly in Tintin in Tibet there is no
villain. No villain.
Even the Yeti is not a villain. Yeti is a subject of love. You ultimately you love. You get the last moment, the parting moment, you look at the Yeti and he behaves like a human being who is feeling sad and very much, bereaved.
Yes, my children read Tintin books as well. It's lovely to hear you talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
And you're very interesting about white. I'm a painter as well, and the concept of whether white's a colour or not is something else to go on about. But it's been lovely being part of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So do we have any more questions, Akash? In that case, we can wrap up this session tonight. I think there is a question for Madam Pippa King.
Stanley. Okay.
In this present world after Stanley, do you idolize?
I'll read out the question. How much role the superheroes play in the present world? After Stanley, do you think Marvel will idolize more such heroes to show a lamp to this ongoing darkness?
That's a very heavy question. I mean, I haven't followed Marvel that much, but in my day, the Silver Surfer was the great, the great blind hero who swooped in and sorted out things. And I think Marvel, they're working. I can't say they have an agenda, but I think they still do that sort of cowboys and Indians thing, or the goodies and the baddies, as in sort of 1940s movies. They don't actually wear black hats or white hats, but they have a definite moral, if underlying, but a definite sort of stance that they're going through along with still all these years later. So, but I can't say after the Silver Surfer, I can't say I've followed Marvel comics as they let me go, so I went on to other things. Is that how?
Just to kind of tag along what you were saying, Pippa, about and the question talks about holding a candle, kind of being a beacon of hope. I mean, superheroes are expected to do that. I'm just reminded of something sort of out of context, but something that kind of relates to this. Pradipta would know, because we teach epics, the great epics, like for example Homer in the classroom, and Milton and all that. And we kind of talk about the fact that, I mean, we also teach Anglo-Saxon heroic literature to our students who are listening. I think many of them are listening right now. The point that we make is very simple. We say that we all love our heroes. I mean, whether they are modern day superheroes or even the heroes of myth, but we do not like or love the times which they have been born to set right. Because if the times were all right, if the times were absolutely perfect, we would not need a hero to be born to set it right, to fight a monster, to do something extraordinary. Because a hero is born because something's wrong with the time, essentially, and then he has to set it right. So it's not a very nice thing to be born in the same time and age as a hero. It's fine to look on to him. I mean, when he performs it in a story or in a narrative in a film, but it's not really nice to be, because it's a time of disquiet. Normally, a hero is born in a time of disquiet. He comes as the dancer. He has to do something violent or something proactive or something like that in order to set things right. So things are not right. I mean, to live in that world is probably not the best experience of the lot. So we, on the one hand, we love our heroes, but on the other hand, if we were given a choice, we would perhaps not like to live in those times which need a hero. It's rather better to live in times which do not need a hero, because the times are peaceful, maybe better. Don't need people to set it right, probably. So there's a kind of a balance. It's a little bit of a conundrum. We love those heroes, we love their great acts, but we do not like the times in which they are born. If we have to be in those times, because then we have to suffer a lot. And then they might come to relieve us of our stress, of our distress, or whatever. But it's a kind of a balance, superheroes, heroes being there, and the necessity and the time that needs a hero. If a time needs a hero, a particular time needs a hero, obviously there's something wrong with the time. So that is something that we need to use as a kind of a counterbalance. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's just an extension of what Pippa has been saying. Just thought as a person from the
No, I agree, but we are in very, very dark times around the world at the moment, And what we mustn't do is have superheroes as fantasies that will sort of make it all right, because it's got to be what human beings do to make it all right, don't you think? I mean, the superheroes are about a fantasy world, and although we can enjoy it, they mustn't take away from the painful reality of what we've got to deal with in this day and age, I think. I mean, we're in seriously bad trouble all around the world. Sorry to be so gloomy, but I feel gloomy about it.
No, I mean, we have to ponder, our own situation as a find the best way forward if possible. But then we can't ignore that we are in the dark. And the question which refers to light and holding the candle and all that, it's maybe also a reflection of the fact that, as you say, we are quite in the dark. I mean, in many ways. And perhaps, I don't know, as you said, fantasy may not be the answer, but something else. Human resilience, perhaps, shown as some kind of heroism might do the trick. I don't know if that's an answer at all, but let us hope. Pradipta, do we have any further questions? Akash, do we have?
Yes. Can you just hold on, Debashish, because I just wanted to ask one thing to Sharbajit, one question for Sharbajit.
Go ahead.
Okay, so when actually Sharbajit was talking about the ending of Tintin in Tibet, because of low net connectivity, I had to go off screen, and I wanted to just expand on what he said, because it was left incomplete because of my poor internet connectivity. Sharbajit, as you have already mentioned, in the last frame of Tintin in Tibet, we almost enter as readers, as viewers, we enter into the subject position of the Yeti. The Yeti is observing the departure of Chang. He had protected and cared and nurtured Chang for quite a while. And now, he will remain that lonely, wild other beast. And it is here at the last frame that we as readers and viewers, we enter into the subject position. It's a very privileged subject position for us. We enter the subject position of the Yeti. And it's a very touching emotional moment. So as a graphic artist, Sharbajita, I would want you to tell us your take on this last frame of Tintin in Tibet.
Let me feel free to talk about it in my own way, okay?
Sure.
So personally, I loved the frame. It goes without saying. You are talking about the framing, the positioning of the character. That is also a very tricky question. That's a very fantastic thing that you have asked, because you think about one, Yeti is no longer abominable in Tintin in Tibet. Yeti, for the first time, you feel that you have some sort of love for Yeti. Okay, Yeti is a caring and very affectionate sort of creature or living being. So only once, just for one time, at the last frame, at the fag end of the story, the camera is on the other side, as if it's a Yeti's point of view, and we are having a very long shot of the characters of the story, and this is from the perspective of the Yeti, and this suddenly came to Hertz's mind. I mean, this is how a genius works. I at times I wonder, would it have been possible for any other person to take the camera to the other side of this thing, a totally fictitious kind of character like a Yeti? And so many rumors are floating in the air, and so many myths and popular beliefs around a thing like Yeti, the abominable snowman. And most probably, if I'm not mistaken, there are the last concluding lines of Hertz at the bottom of it was something like, so he has to wait till yet another plane crash or something like that, most probably, like something like this, unless he may have to wait for all these days until or unless some such thing happens again. So So that is
Sarbajita, I have the book with me. I'll just read out the last penultimate frame for all of us.
yeah.
A goodbye from the Yeti, Chan. Now he is alone again until
Yeah.
someone from an expedition manages to catch him.
Oh yes.
A present from Tibet, from Snowy, and the penultimate frame says, I hope they never succeed in finding him. They would
Yeah.
treat him like some wild animal. I tell
That's right.
you, Tintin, from the way he took care of me, I couldn't help wondering if deep down he hadn't a human soul. And Tintin says, who knows?
Yes. That's it. So it says everything. It says all. That says it all.
Absolutely. It says it all.
Yeah, no, very fantastic. Great thing to end on as well.
Thank you.
So I think we can end
Thank you.
for tonight. Devashish, what do you say? Shall we wrap it up?
Yes, we shall wrap it up. Before I do that, I thank profusely the two wonderful speakers, practitioners, who have shared their insights, their experience, their journeys with us this evening. Mr. Sarbajit Sen and Pippa King. It's been fascinating, it's been enthralling to hear you. I write with the rights and hear from artists who are visual artists, who slightly deal with a slightly different medium of looking at the world. And hear them just speak their minds out. It's been a real pleasure. It's been a thrill, a minute this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Pippa King. Thank you, Sarbajita. Please accept my heartfelt gratitude for being with us on Inspirare India.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
It's been lovely. It's been
Thank
lovely.
you so much. And thank you, audience, for your participation.
Thank you. Thank you for being our partners. Thank you so much for being our partner.
Thank you, Akash. Thank you, Anish.
Yes.
And our broadcasting partner, Joho.
Yes. Big thanks to everybody.